I want to start off this morning by asking you, do you know the moment where life circles back and suddenly you have the chance to finally say what you never got to say to somebody? Maybe you run into someone unexpectedly. Maybe a conversation opens up that wasn't supposed to happen. Maybe someone brings up a name from your past, and you think, this is my chance. For some, it's about being honest. For others, it's about confronting what someone never owned. For some, it's revenge, and for others, it's release. But either way, you finally have the moment. So you start planning what you would say. This is how you hurt me. This is what actually happened. This is the truth that you never acknowledged. Or this is why I walked away. This is what you never understood. There's so many ways to go about it. And the longer you sit with it, the better it feels in your mind. So some of us rehearse sentences. Some rehearse tone. Some rehearse silence that make them ask questions. Because some of us don't want the resolution, but we want the recognition. Because for the first time, they're listening, they're present, and they need you to answer. And whether you want justice, clarity, revenge, release, or peace, this finally feels like the right moment to say what's been on your mind. You could finish something that never got finished. You could finally settle what's been unsettled. You could close the sentence that always had a comma. We all know the moment. The moment where we could say something that we never said before, and it would feel like we finally returned the weight that we had carried. And it's not only what hurts you that tests you, it's also what tempts you to take matters into your own hands. And that exact moment is where we find David standing in a cave. Not with a conversation, but with a decision to make. Not with a sentence, but with a sword. A moment that felt right for him. It looked right, and everyone around him even said it was right. And David stepped into that moment with all the desire, the pain, and unfinished business that you've ever carried into yours. So let's get into it together. Let's turn to 1 Samuel chapter 24 and look at verses 1 to 7. So as we arrive, we look at verses 1 to 7. When Saul, that is King Saul, when Saul returned from following the Philistines, he was told, "Behold, David is in the wilderness of En-gedi." Then Saul took 3,000 chosen men out of all Israel and went to seek David and his men in front of the wild goats' rocks. And he came to the sheepfolds by the way where there was a cave. And Saul went in to relieve himself. Now David and his men were sitting in the innermost parts of the cave. And the men of David said to him, "Here is the day of which the Lord said to you, Behold, I will give your enemy into your hand, and you shall do to him as it shall seem good to you." Then David arose and stealthily cut off the corner of Saul's robe. And afterward, David's heart struck him, because he had cut off a corner of Saul's robe. He said to his men, "The Lord forbid that I should do this thing to my Lord, the Lord's anointed, to put my hand against him, seeing he is the Lord's anointed." So David persuaded his men with these words, and did not permit them to attack Saul. And Saul rose up and left the cave and went on his way. And that is where we will stop for now. So the first thing I want to point out is that this is King Saul who is chasing David because he's intimidated. He knows David's soon to be king, and he wants to kill him. So we find Saul coming after David, Saul coming into a cave to relieve himself, and David's there. So the first thing I want to point out about this passage is when it feels right. When it feels right, your heart assumes that God already agreed. So when Saul enters the cave, David doesn't move. His men speak to him, it says. They say, this is the day the Lord promised. But God didn't promise anything of the sort. People interpreted events for David. People projected confirmation. People framed timing as destiny. So when David hears this, he's not responding to God. He's responding to people. Because when a moment finally matches what we hope for, we stop asking God and start assuming God. Because desire doesn't leave when opportunity arrives. It disguises itself as obedience. And here's the subtle deception. Desire learns how to speak fluid obedience when timing feels convenient. We don't stop wanting revenge because the moment now looks holy, do we? We don't stop craving validation just because timing feels supernatural, do we? And that right there is where discernment starts breaking down. And if desire isn't dead, discernment isn't clear. You see, this is where we mess up. We think that our feelings are sometimes revelation. We think to ourselves, it feels right, so God must want this for me. But feelings are mirrors. Feelings are mirrors, not maps. They reveal what we want, not where God is leading. So the moment doesn't expose the situation, it actually exposes us. And this is where the danger really sets in. You will confuse relief with release. And when you want relief from something, you will call anything confirmation. Relief equals, I don't want to endure anymore. Release in the mind equals, God has finished shaping me in this. But most believers mistake the first from the second. If you need something now, you will interpret anything to be God if you want it bad enough. Need creates false revelation, and urgency performs as certainty. That's why when urgency masquerades as clarity. Let me give you an example. Let me show you how this plays out without looking sinful. So a person here hears that someone from the past is struggling. Not falling apart, just having a difficult time. Maybe someone tells them, yeah, they're not doing so great right now. And something rises in you, not anger, rises in them, not anger, not sentiment, but that familiar sense of, I should say something. And they don't imagine doing harm, they imagine doing good. They think, I just want them to know I'm not against them. I just want them to know I have no bitterness. I just want to make peace. So they begin rehearsing. Hey, been thinking about you. Hope everything's okay. Let me know if you need anything. And none of that's wrong. But when they imagine the scene, what it would feel like for that person to receive those words, to read them, to realize that you still care, to recognize that you remember them. And something inside feels good. Because now you're the bigger person. You're the one handing out grace. You're the one taking initiative. You're the one being mature. So you sit with that feeling of feeling good. And the good feeling becomes the motive. Not compassion, but affirmation. Not love, but validation. Not reconciliation, but identity. Because deep down, you don't just want to be kind, you want to be seen as healed. You don't just want to bless them, you want them to finally recognize your character. And what once was about them quietly became about you. So, emotionally generous but inwardly manipulative. Right thing in the wrong timing. Good motive polluted by deeper need. So what do? We bring this to the Lord, not because the moment is wrong, but because our motive might be. God is not exposing the opportunity, He's exposing the appetite behind it. When God exposes desire, He isn't punishing you. He's protecting you from acting on something that you don't actually want. Just something you want relief from. Because sometimes what feels like peace is just really exhaustion. Sometimes what feels like wisdom is actually impatience. Sometimes what feels like closure is actually really the craving of finally being heard. So the prayer is not, Lord, should I do this or that? But Lord, why do I want to? Lord, show me the places inside of me that agree with timing before they agree with obedience. Lord, reveal when I am chasing relief instead of your release. Lord, expose when something feels right only because I'm tired of waiting. And just when we think we have discerned correctly, watch what happens next. Alignment without surrender becomes misdirection. You think the moment is divine because it feels aligned. But now we enter a stage where the moment still looks divine, even though your heart is already bending. Point 1 is when it felt right. Point 2 is when it still looks right after God has already started convicting you. When it still looks right. So David cuts the robe, Scripture says, but he doesn't cut Saul. In that moment, it still looks right. Why? Because cutting the robe cost Saul nothing. Saul didn't bleed. Saul didn't know in the moment. Saul didn't lose his life. But biblically, the robe wasn't just fabric. You see, in Israel, the robe represented authority because the king's garments marked the one that God installed. It also represented covering because leadership was often symbolized through rich garments. It symbolizes identity because a king was recognized by his robe, by his crown, and by his seal. Divine appointment because kingship wasn't voted in. It was believed to be anointed in. So when David cut the robe, he didn't just separate cloth, he symbolically touched kingship. He laid his hand on something that heaven had not transferred to him yet. That's what made it still look right. It looked like he had restraint. It looked like he had honor. It looked like he had proof. It looked like David saying to Saul, I could have ended your life, but I didn't. But verse 5 says, David's heart struck him. Not because the act itself was sin, but because he stepped towards something that was not his yet. He didn't dethrone King Saul physically, but he touched what God had put on Saul spiritually. And David knew it. This was not mine to take yet. And that's what makes conviction arrive. Not because what he did was wrong, but because what he moved toward was right, but without God's release. This is the deepest danger in obedience. When something looks surrendered externally, while still being self-timed internally. Because half obedience is never obedience. It is delayed surrender dressed up as faithfulness. You see, David wasn't rebelling. He was reaching for something He was reaching for something that God just hasn't given him yet. This is where we get in trouble. Not when we refuse God's will, but when we try to speed it up. When obedience still allows us to hold control, we're not obeying, we're negotiating. And God doesn't just test what we do, He tests when we do it. Because timing reveals whether we trust Him or simply agree with Him. Yet we mess up. We justify the miniature version of what we wanted. We say to ourselves, I didn't wreck them like I could have. I didn't confront them the way they deserved. We think restraint equals righteousness because it feels like restraint is holiness. But restraint is only submission when desire is dead. But restraint without release is bitterness and costly. So you're restraining action, but still withholding outcome. So if you settle for symbolic victory, you lose actual destiny. David could have walked out the cave with Saul's head in his hands. He walked out instead with Saul's respect. And that's the difference. Half obedience feels safe because it lets you keep control while still continuing to surrender. And I say that he walked out of the cave with Saul's respect because verses 8 says, Afterward David also arose and went out of the cave and called after Saul, My Lord the king. And when Saul looked behind him, David bowed with his face to the earth and paid homage. And David said to Saul, Why do you listen to the words of men who say, Behold, David seeks your harm. Behold, this day your eyes have seen how the Lord gave you today into my hand in the cave. And some told me to kill you, but I spared you. I said, I will not put out my hand against my Lord, for he is the Lord's anointed. See, my father, see the corner of your robe in my hand. For by the fact that I cut off the corner of your robe, I did not kill you. You may know and see that there is no wrong or treason in my hands. I have not sinned against you, though you hunt my life to take it. May the Lord judge between me and you, and the Lord avenge me against you, but my hand shall not be against you. So David could have walked out that cave with Saul's head, but he walked out instead with Saul's respect. That's the difference. Half obedience feels safe because it lets you keep control, but while still continuing to surrender. Let me give you a personal example. Thursday at work, I was talking with someone I had spent time with before. We went out multiple times, had dinners, we had good conversations, and clear interests. Nothing confusing about it. That day at work, she was flirting, leaning in, laughing. So I asked her, hey, you want to hang out later? Then, and she said, I already have plans. So I said, of course you did, and walked away. I wasn't upset and I didn't need anything. It just caught me off guard because the momentum shifted fast. So later she brought it up and said, why did you sound bothered by that? And I told her, we were in a playful, flirty vibe, and the energy switched fast. I wasn't expecting to change, and so I adjusted and I moved on. Legit what I told her. Not because what I said was sinful, no, but because it was timed by self-protection, not by discernment. See what I'm saying? And that's when the Lord convicted me. I didn't step back because I heard Him, because I heard His voice. I stepped back because our uncertainty in that moment felt uncomfortable. And that's exactly what David did. He didn't sin. He didn't lash out. He didn't take matters all the way. But he cut the robe so he wouldn't have to sit in the tension. Sometimes obedience isn't tested by what we refuse to do. It's tested by what we refuse to leave open. So cutting the robe still looked right to David because it allowed David to say, I could have done more, but that's the trap. When you almost do what you wanted just so you can say you held back, that's not obedience. That's proof that you still want to control. Control is the last part of us to die. And God won't move while we're still holding onto the outcome. Obedience is when you can walk away with nothing to show for it. Sometimes that's hard. So now we're into the stage where obedience doesn't feel spiritual anymore. It feels like losing. The third thing I want to point out about this passage is when it is right. And this is emotional depletion. The moment when obedience doesn't feel meaningful. Where doing the right thing feels pointless. Like David walking out of that cave with no crown, no throne, and no immediate reward. He felt as if he did the right thing and nothing happened. That is righteousness and fatigue. Because for the first time, doing what is right doesn't feel like progress. It feels like loss. This is when obedience feels like it's subtracting from your life, not adding to it. You didn't get breakthrough. You didn't get closure. You didn't get validation. You obeyed, and it looks like nothing changed. That's when obedience stops giving back. It starts taking from you. This is where most believers break. Not when obedience costs effort, but when obedience costs meaning. Because effort you can recover from. But meaninglessness, it drains you. David holds fabric. He displays restraint. Saul recognizes righteousness. Not instantly, not emotionally, but with guarantee of safety. Obedience didn't accelerate anything forward. It actually slowed the momentum down. And later, after David walked away, Saul did acknowledge his righteousness. But notice something. That recognition didn't remove David's waiting. It didn't shorten the journey for him. It didn't give David the throne anytime sooner. It simply revealed that God wasn't wasting his restraint. David's integrity bore weight on its own. And this is when obedience becomes identity. Because belief isn't proven when obedience gives you something. But when obedience seems to cost more than it gives. Anybody can obey when obedience rewards them. Anybody can obey when obedience makes life easier. Anybody can walk upright when walking upright is seen, affirmed, and applauded. But this is different. This is where obedience feels like subtraction. This is where righteousness removes options instead of opening them. This is where doing the right thing closes a door that you wanted God to open. And here's the text. Obedience that does not benefit you immediately reveals whether you serve God or the outcomes. Because if obedience needs payoff, then God isn't your master. The results are. So how do we go wrong? We think God should validate obedience instantly. We think that our restraint should result in instant reward. We think avoiding the wrong thing should fast forward us into the right thing. But sometimes, you guys, obedience doesn't accelerate anything. It just exposes something. Sometimes restraint doesn't open doors like we want. It reveals what doors we wish would open. And when obedience doesn't change our circumstances, we assume that our obedience failed. But obedience rarely changes circumstances first. It changes us first. And that is where many believers stumble. They think if nothing shifted around me, then what was the point of doing right? I've had that very conversation not too long ago. If nothing shifted around me, then what's the point? But God's answer is simple. The point was you. Because if obedience doesn't reshape you, then what you offered wasn't obedience, it was spiritual performance. Performance wants results. Obedience wants God. Performance says, look what I did. Obedience says, search who I am becoming. If all obedience gave you was a changed situation, it wouldn't change you. God sometimes delays outcomes so obedience has enough time to shape our identity. Let me give you an example. A man once told me about something that marked him for the rest of his life. His father wasn't warm, he wasn't expressive, he wasn't emotional. But he was faithful. He showed up, he provided, and he stayed. And the son kept saying to himself, one day we will talk. Not now, but one day. He assumed the moment would come when emotions don't run high, when nobody felt defensive, and when timing just wouldn't be tense. So he waited, because waiting felt safer than confronting. He rehearsed the conversation in his mind 1,000 times. If he brings it up first, I will say this. If it feels natural, I'll do it like this. If he ever acknowledges it, it'll be okay. He was writing scripts in his mind for a moment that hadn't happened yet. Years passed by, life got noisy, responsibilities increased, and he kept saying, not now, but eventually. So one afternoon, the father came home from a doctor's appointment with news that no one wanted. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just a sentence in a quiet kitchen. It doesn't look good. And suddenly the son could feel the moment coming. And he thought to himself, this is it. This is the conversation. This is when we finally say what wasn't said. He was waiting for the right day, because after all these years, a moment that big deserves the right setting. So he waited one more day, and then another. And then another. One morning before the sun came up, his father died in his sleep. No talks, no closure, no moment, just silence. And the son said something that breaks him. He said, I waited until it felt right, and when it finally did, it was gone. David could have forced his moment in that cave. He could have taken clarity into his own hands. He could have ended a tension that he didn't like living in. But here's the difference. David didn't close that moment. He surrendered the moment. He walked away without answers, without reward, and without clarity. And outside that cave, God spoke through the very man who hunted him down like a dog. Saul said, you are more righteous than I, and you surely will be king. Not when David grabbed it, not when David forced it. That's verse 17, by the way. He said to David, you are more righteous than I. So it wasn't when David grabbed at it, not when he forced it, not when David was ready, but when God released it. Sometimes the moment that you want does not exist tomorrow. Sometimes the conversation cannot be delayed. Sometimes obedience is not waiting for the right feeling, but surrendering control of the timing. Some of us keep waiting for a moment to feel right instead of simply obeying while it still matters. So, here's what I want you to do. Throughout the week, say slowly to yourself, here's where obedience gets tested in real life. Not when something is wrong, but when something feels unfinished. You see, obedience is when I stop trying to finish what God is still trying to use to form me. So here are some examples to do daily. For some, that means not answering so you can win the moment. Not demanding clarity today. Not trying to put a bow on something that God hasn't sealed. Sometimes obedience means just letting something sit. We think closure brings healing, but sometimes closure kills what God is still trying to mature. So here's the prayer I want you to pray. Lord, keep me from finishing what you're still shaping. You see, there are moments in life when everything looks like it finally aligns. When you could fix what's broken, close what's unfinished, say what wasn't said, and settle what has been lingering. And deep inside you whisper, surely this is God opening the moment. But today, God is not an illuminating opportunity. He is confronting your motive. There are some who have waited years for the right moment. To be understood, to speak the truth, to defend yourself, to bring closure. And like David in that cave, everything around you seems to say, this is the day. But not everything that looks right is ready. Some of you have said secretly, Lord, I don't deserve this. And your heart has felt the sting of delay. Not loud enough to run, but quiet enough to question. And right now, as clearly as I have ever sensed it, God is calling us not just to move forward, but to surrender timing. Because Jesus himself had a moment to take control. In the Garden of Gethsemane, before his accusers, before a cross that was not his to carry. He could have explained himself, could have defended himself, could have called down 1,000 angels like he told Peter, or he could have walked away. But Isaiah said, like a lamb before its shears is silent, so he opened not his mouth. You see, silence wasn't weakness. Silence was obedience. And today, God is not asking you to fix it, to change it, to force it, or to complete it. He's asking you to release it. Now, right here, right now, if you're in a cave-like place where the moment looks reachable, it looks justifiable, it looks explainable, almost righteous, but God is whispering, not yet. I want you to stand with me. No one is watching you. No one is judging you. Nor they care that you're standing. But you know this moment is yours. So stand. Because standing is not performance, it is surrender. Standing says, I will not take the robe in my own hands. Standing says, I won't cut what God has not released. Now lift your heart, not to me, not to other people, but to Christ. And here in a moment, when we pray, ask the Lord to release timing. Tell him that you release the payoff and release the right to finish what he's still shaping. Just release control. And here it is. The cross did not look victorious until the third day. Friday looked meaningless. Saturday felt silent. But obedience was resurrecting behind the stone on the third day. And God is doing the same in you. So today we don't close anything. We surrender it. Because if obedience must be rewarded to continue, then outcome is your master. But if obedience stands even when nothing shifts, that is worship. So stand in His presence and whisper, Lord, until what looks right becomes what is right, I will wait on you. So let us pray.